Members, we turn now to the Substance Addiction Compulsory Assessment and Treatment Bill. Leave has been given for all parts to be dealt as one, debated as one, voted separately. The question is that parts 1 to 3 and schedules 1 and 2 and clauses 1 and 2 stand part.
Mr. Chairman.
I call Pottle Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It gives me pleasure to take a call on the Substance Addiction Compulsory Assessment and Treatment Bill. Mr. Chairman, I want to start with the clause 22, the requirements for specialist assessment. The significance of the people who will become for whom this piece of legislation is important are those who, Mr. Chairman, have got significant addiction issues, so significant that they are at a point of it being life-threatening to them. So the requirements under this particular clause, the specialist assessment, is to ensure that all the clinical advice, all the criteria with regards to their treatment are addressed appropriately before before an application is then made for their compulsory treatment. Now, the court making that compulsory treatment order sits within within clause 32, and it's an important part of the discussion that we had in Select Committee, because when you are actually compelling somebody into treatment and you are withdrawing their ability to have free access to Mr. Chairman, it is a really important thing that in legislation we get that absolutely right. So we looked to initially to what happens under compulsory treatment orders within the mental health field, and looked to that as the model with which to ensure that we could ensure that somebody being compulsorily treated for their addictions would be able to retain the rights that they are due under that. It is a significant thing to have somebody take the ability for you to decide how you want to be treated away from you, and we have to, as legislators, ensure that we get that absolutely right. It is it's not an easy thing we do. We're not talking about large numbers of people over the course of the year. I think probably about 200 patients would possibly be in a position to have applications made for them and on their behalf. And we talked about the notion of compulsion and how important it was in this particular environment where, generally speaking, when somebody is seeking treatment for whatever condition they may have, the usual way to do that is for that patient to be completely informed and for that process to then allow them to make some decision. But we are talking about a different cohort of people who may, because their addictions are so severe, they are not in a position to actually make those decisions for themselves. During the course of the Select Committee process, there are some changes that we made to particular definitions. For example, what is a treatment centre? One of the scenarios that was presented to the committee was around particular residential facilities and whether they could be considered as treatment centres. And the decision was made that there being such a specialised field that we needed to ensure that we could define those appropriately to make sure that those centres were staffed by the people who had the expertise to deal with this significant cohort of people. There were some other things that we really felt we needed to ensure that we could get right. The ability for that person to have somebody act on their behalf, and this was where the role of the district inspectors came into play, similar to what happens within the mental health environment, somebody who is objective and could ensure that the rights of the patient were upheld. We also talked a lot about what happens when somebody goes into this type of treatment, what might happen to their family members and their family's ability to ensure that they know what kind of treatment their loved one is undertaking. So part of the legislation was to ensure that children in particular of patients had the ability to be notified when their loved one was having a compulsory treatment order placed upon them. Mr. Chairman, we spent a bit of time talking about what an approved provider, approved facility, and just what the criteria would be to ensure that they could meet a particular standard. Some of the submitters said to us, Mr. Chairman, that they were concerned that the level of expertise and to provide this type of care and this type of treatment is something that we have some way to go to address. Even the small numbers of patients that we will be treating over the course of the year, we have actually got some gaps in capacity and some gaps in knowledge in this country, and we were concerned at the Select Committee and we discussed this quite a bit about whether we would be in a position to have the treatment available as is required in the legislation from when the legislation actually is passed, and there was some concern that that was not actually going to be in place. So that's one of the things I would really like for the Minister to discuss, whether he is satisfied that the level of expertise is actually going to be available to ensure that the legislation is carried out to its full extent, and whether there are plans in place that he's aware of to build that capacity into the health system. Mr. Chairman, I will make some further contributions later, but I would ask the Minister if he has got some confidence that he can supply to the House about that particular issue.